Welcome back to the McGregor Angle. My name's Catherine McGregor, and joining me now from our Perth studio to dissect the political events of the week is columnist and broadcaster Jenna Clarke. Jenna, thanks for joining us, especially on Good Friday. You must have been tempted to cut away and get some time off. Thank you.
Not at all, Kat. There's nothing I would rather be chatting to you than eating hot cross buns, my fifth of the day, but that doesn't matter.
Aren't you wonderful? I've been trying to stay away from them myself, but that's another story. Look, Jenna, it's great to get a WA perspective for a number of reasons. You would have obviously seen the news poll this week that seemed to confirm that the government has definitely lost some traction or lost some standing over the allegations out of the Brittany Higgins and the Porter cases. And that's reflected both in the Prime Minister's numbers and the party head-to-head, with Labor solidifying a lead. You live in a state that saw the coalition annihilated, in no other word for it. I'm just starting to wonder, how has the PM managed to turn incumbent, or to be struggling as an incumbent when you've seen an incumbent resoundingly elected there? What's your assessment? Is it all related to the issues of his tenure on women's issues, or do you think the vaccine rollout is hurting him as well, or all of the above? I'm a little puzzled at how far and fast he's fallen.
Yeah, so am I actually, Catherine. But before, I guess, what we saw with the WA election, where Newspoll were predicting the exact outcome that we saw in the WA election just a couple of weeks ago, I think everyone's a bit sceptical of reading too much into the numbers. But I think the fact that he dropped off so rapidly in just 2 weeks was interesting. But I think the one thing we need to focus on is that, sure, the PM's numbers dropped, but the two-party, and so did the two-party preferred, but Albo's numbers didn't really creep up. So it's not like the opposition are doing anything to sort of combat what the Prime Minister is trying to struggle with here. I think we're definitely going to see a buoyant comeback in the next poll that's taken, given he's taken action. He started to take action with that new Women Ministry, and the fact that I think he's tried to present himself as someone who is trying to listen as best he can, as a man trying to understand some of the issues that confront women, not only in his party but in the wider community. I was pretty sceptical also of the fact that this could just be a women's issue, and the fact that I think that the one thing, there's there's a big difference between the issues. I think there's the Brittany Higgins allegation, and there's also the Christian Porter issue. And I think that the general public over here in WA definitely are honed in more on the Brittany Higgins case than they are with what's happening with Mr Porter and his legal case that he's going to continue on with. Because I think that they probably can understand the Higgins case a little bit more, thinking, which I think what the Prime Minister enunciated, but he was howled down on social media about, because I think a lot of people consider that, well, what if that was my daughter? What if that was my sister? What if that was my best friend who had to go through that and was given no support? And interestingly, on FM radio last week, we actually put the call out just to see where the temperature was with the Prime Minister. And you would think that FM radio is not really where callers would call in to talk about policy or issues of the day when it comes to Canberra. But every single one of them that called in said, look, I'm just disgusted with how this issue has been handled. In the real world, because that's what they call it, the real world, this sort of issue would be absolutely dealt with in an appropriate, courteous and kind manner to the alleged victim. And we even had one man that called in from a suburb that you would definitely say would be a blue ribbon Liberal seat, say, I voted Liberal my entire life, but Mr Morrison's action on this specific case has really started to question my belief in the Liberal Party, which to me was quite alarming, thinking that they really need to get on top of this. And I think we're going to see it now. We're going to have the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, pop over here in the next couple of weeks to talk about the economic recovery. But I think a lot of people, because things are rosy in WA, the economy is booming, we're all safe from COVID, thanks to Emperor McGowan. So it's going to be interesting to see how he combats the issue of sexual misconduct and harassment allegations within the party and also Parliament at large.
Indeed. And of course, the big story of the week was the ministerial reshuffle. And again, I know the COVID border closures have borne out the fact that there's a distinct WA identity, a very, very proud separate identity in a sense. And there were two casualties, as it were, in the sense that Linda Reynolds lost the defence portfolio, which is more prestigious, and Christian Porter, Leader of the House and Attorney General. Is there any sense of grievance about that, or do you think on balance the reshuffle has played reasonably well electorally for the PM. What's your sense on that?
I think it's going to play out quite well. I think a lot of people in WA who are probably not familiar with some of Michaelia Cash, the new Attorney General Michaelia Cash's, say, Senate committee hearing appearances with whiteboards and such, they're probably not too familiar with that. But I think that they're pretty proud of the fact that we now have only, I think, the third female Attorney General in Michaelia Cash being from over here, which is pretty exciting. I think the Christian Porter issue's probably got a long way to play out, considering once this starts going to court and it starts playing out in the papers, I think people will probably start paying more attention from his electorate of Pearce. I don't think that those sort of issues really concern them. I think people out there probably just want to know, you know, make sure that our electricity bills are down, make sure we have jobs in the future and security for my children moving forward is probably the big issues out there. And he's served them well for the number of years that he's been out there. I think Senator Reynolds being demoted, I think it's disappointing for her. She would be definitely disappointed in that step back into government affairs and also the NDIS. But hopefully she can sort of pick herself up and really make a difference in that portfolio of the NDIS, because God knows it really does need someone with a keen eye for detail. And she's definitely shown that she has that in defence before all of this internal issues sort of took place in her office.
Indeed, and national security is a natural strength of the coalition, and I would have thought the appointment of Peter Dutton to Defence strengthens the coalition's hand there. And you've of course got a substantial ADF footprint over there, which is probably one of the reasons you didn't secede last year. I suspect we want our Army and Navy back. Any sense of how the ADF community are responding to the change in Minister? I think he's probably seen as a strong voice in Cabinet on their behalf.
Yeah, and I think it's also an interesting appointment that he's also been given Leader of the House in the Reps, which I think that was probably, of all of the jobs that Christian Porter did have, which was probably the one that he left lacking. He wasn't, when you go from having someone like Christopher Pyne, who knew parliamentary process like the back of his hand and could play the chamber like an orchestra, I think having someone like Peter Dutton it would be a very vast difference in the way that they handle the procedures moving forward. So I think Morrison will probably appreciate someone that understands how the Parliament it should run, specifically now that their numbers could become dwindling, regardless of what happens with Andrew Laming and things like that. So it's interesting. I haven't heard a lot from the ADF community about the appointment of the new minister, but I think that they'll definitely enjoy having someone a little bit more vocal in their corner. Will probably do them the wealth of good, considering the Brereton report, and there was a lot of discomfort over that when that was released earlier in the year.
Absolutely. I know the people of Western Australia hold the SAS regiment very close to their heart. Look, finally on vaccine rollout, what's your sense of, again, we've seen the state leaders unanimous in criticising the federal government over that, and they seem to be winning the argument. How's it playing out over there?
Yeah, I feel Premier McGowan's really getting on the front foot to continue to say that we are trying to roll out as quickly as possible. But over here, I think if we had another incident like we saw with Queensland, where we had frontline workers weren't fully vaccinated, like we had with our last lockdown, where we had frontline workers not even wearing PPE when they're dealing with COVID-infected travellers returning from overseas, there will be mass public outcry. And I think a lot of people will lay the blame at the foot of the Premier, because he's ultimately in charge of what happens in our hospitals and our health system over here. And if that was to happen, I mean, the health system in WA is already facing challenges, what the Health Minister says, but we're seeing record numbers of ambulance ramping hours. And we saw 3 of our major metropolitan hospitals just a week ago move into code yellow, meaning that they had to turn away patients from emergency departments because there was just no room at the inn, because in order to prepare for a COVID outbreak and for budget reasons, they'd started closing beds. So our health system's already under a lot of pressure. So I think that the Premier would be very keen to get this vaccine rollout going as soon as possible and as quickly as possible. I think we've had about 45,000 West Australians vaccinated, but I think we'll be looking at people in the front line, but then also our most vulnerable, meaning our Indigenous communities as well. We've heard nothing about how that's going, so I think that's going to be an issue that will play out both here in the West Australian newspaper and hopefully under Paige Taylor at the Australian over the next couple of days.
Keep an eye out for that. Jenna, thank you so much for dedicating your time to us. It's still afternoon over there, and the one good thing about this weekend is you'll rejoin Australia by 1 hour, so you'll only be 2 hours off the pace.
That's right.
You enjoy the rest of your Easter, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You too. Anything for you, Kath. You take care.
Cheers.